with that, I would like to switch my slides and take us into the next word from our sponsor on the next panel. Kurtis, are you out there? Could I ask you to speak for a few minutes, or a minute hopefully, on LINX?
Thank you. I'm Kurtis Lindqvist. I'm the CEO of LINX, the London Internet Exchange. We're one of the world's largest interconnect platforms. We have platforms in London, Manchester, Scotland, Wales in the UK, in Northern Virginia in the US, and in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And we provide peering and other interconnect services in multi-data center environments. Yeah, that's as we want to do. We handle peak traffic on 6 terabits across all the platforms. And I think that's a very brief summary of us.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining the panel. So with that, let's press the magic slide button, and I'm going to hand over to Mark to take us into the next panel. Mark.
Yes, thanks, Dom. Thanks for the intro. Great to hear about LINX. Also want to intro two other people of the panel, Stephan Schroeder and Tom Hodgson. Stephan, could you, in one sentence, tell a little bit about what you do with Benocs? You're still muted, Stephan.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Mark. I'm Stephan Schroeder, CEO of Benocs. Benocs is a spin-off of Deutsche Telekom Laboratories, focusing on data or network flow analytics and optimization.
Great. Tom Hodgson, Lumen, little word.
Hi, Tom Hodgson. I'm the Interconnection Strategy Manager for EMEA for Lumen. For those of us who don't know, we are a IP transit carrier, we are a CDN, we are a US eyeball network, amongst many other things.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I love this panel because we have 3 different areas. So we have an exchange, we have a carrier, we have an ISP as well, right? A CDN, and Benocs specifically really having more key about analytics on ISP level. So a great, let's say, mix of different stakeholders in the network business. A first question for you guys. Dom was a little bit early on the COVID question already, so he took that from me. But a question there as well. We've seen a massive amount of traffic surge the last couple, let's say 1.5 years. Do we expect that to keep, or do we expect this to go down? And if there's still growth going, where does that growth actually come from? Tom.
So I think I've been taking a look at some of our sort of longer term stats the other day, and if you look at our IP network, we are now consistent. Our daily consistent peak is above the peaks we were seeing at the height of lockdown last spring. Traffic has continued to grow, as it does every year. So the idea that we're going to suddenly go through that uptick of the lockdowns and the sort of downtick as people start to unlock doesn't seem to be materializing. Obviously, various countries are in different stages of coming out of their lockdowns and their experiences with COVID. But I think what we see speaking to our customers is the change in working habits is definitely here to stay, at least for a while, until people, maybe once people have started doing it for some time, some people prefer to go back to the office, but we're definitely seeing, daytime peaks are, or not necessarily peaks, but daytime traffic. It used to be very much an evening peak thing. We're starting to see more traffic now in the daytime, just driven by the move of enterprise traffic away from offices and remaining within their WAN environments to going across VPNs, going to OTT cloud providers for their enterprise services. So I don't expect traffic to go down. We're also seeing, the peaks are still being driven by live streaming events. They're being driven by game patches, and that's not likely to disappear. There have been some discussion about how, maybe some of the games providers can restructure some of their patches so that they can be spread out more evenly, because at the moment they are driving the mega peaks. But there's generally, we're still seeing those peaky events for the live streaming events as well, and that's not about to change anytime soon.
Great. Kurtis, what's your take on this?
I very much agree with Tom. I mean, we haven't seen any. Obviously, just like Tom, we see an international mix of traffic, and countries are still in lockdown. But we would have expected to look at the UK portion of traffic that we see that might have gone down when schools reopen, and we haven't seen that really slow down. As a matter of fact, we've seen new all-time high traffic peaks since then. So that sort of supports Tom's argument that I think that this continues to grow, right? You know, will the growth be? I think one thing we had to remember about last year is that growth was extremely compressed into 2 months. You know, March, April last year, at least we saw an extreme growth in 2 months. We were after that concerned about what would happen for the rest of the year, but growth continued as normal. Growth continued this year. So we don't see any at the moment. See any slowdown in the growth.
No. Stephan, you from a let's say analytics level ISP perspective, what's your take on this from that area?
Yeah, we have the ability to look into DT Group's affiliates, so that's say some representation of really say subscriber-based traffic figures which are organic, and I totally support what Kurtis and Tom have said. I don't expect that this traffic will go away anymore and at all, because what we probably have seen is an acceleration in user adoption. So that might actually have taken a longer time for these users to sign up for whatever services, but that now they've obviously eaten from the cake and they will not give it away anymore. We may lose a couple of hours available because people are meeting again physically, but I don't think that will have a significant impact on traffic. There's only one little element which we see on daytime, like Tom said. We have significant traffic in the morning hours, only after, for instance, in Germany, the schools actually have locked down. So I think there's a significant video conferencing traffic which will disappear. But if you take that from the total equation, it's probably 5% of the day, say daytime traffic. So it's not significant.
Good. And then in terms of potential other growth areas that we see, Tom, do you envision any gaming, video, other elements that we have not seen yet, but you think, okay, that's really gonna be the next peak in growth that we will see?
Nothing that I'm heading to invest to in immediately, but I've got a secret tip for the rest of you. I think it's just going to be a continuation of what we see. Bit rates of video are going to go up. People's expectations around UHD delivery. We're starting to people are starting to get 8K TVs. We're starting to hear from some of our customers on the CDN side about potentially wanting to move away from, say, satellite delivery to OTT delivery, just because to distribute those higher 4K 8K streams, the current transponder capacity on the satellites isn't necessarily there, or at least the economics maybe aren't there. And as I say, in the gaming space, there's always the next big game, and one of the reasons why it drives a big peak traffic is the way all the gamers have to be on the latest release for that, so that they can play online. And without multiplayer disappearing, which I can't see, the genie is out of the bottle on that. The idea that kids are going to come home from school, want to turn on their PC, their Xbox, their PlayStation. If they want to play online, they need to download that patch. They're not going to wait for that. So that's what's really driving those peaks. But I think there's a lot of discussion around self-driving cars and where some of the 5G stuff can come in. I think that's still in the very early stages, and what level of traffic that will actually generate, and B will actually hit the internet as opposed to being on more closed private networks. I'm not so sure.
Good. Then a little bit, this was already mentioned earlier, a little bit in the earlier session. If you look at the future, it's all about rack space, power, data center space, hardware, building up the infrastructure just to support everything. Do you see any? Do you think it has any downside on what the IP business and the CDN business is about? Not having that capability of growth that is actually there, but it's not being able to be monetized. Kurtis, can you take a stand on that?
So I think when you say it not being able to monetize, I think there's other parties monetizing it. Maybe, I mean, still being monetized, right? And you know, as in discussion in the previous session, when you see some of the things that Tom just mentioned, you know, increased use of gaming with VR and higher, you know, more advanced multiplayer games, is all going to require much more compute power and at the optimal cost and the optimal backhaul location. You know, and I think we'll see that being deployed in a much more granular fashion maybe than today, both from redundancy point of view, but also maybe from optimizing the service delivery in terms of latency, but also in the economics of delivering it. We're still in some parts of, let's say, the Western world, backhaul to some extent is still cheaper than building a data center and compute, but it's a breaking point for what that equation is, and it's changing all the time, right? And I think we will see, when we see a lot more interest in the regional platforms that we have in the regional exchange of traffic just across the UK or in the other markets we are in, and how this is, you can see people moving to these more compute platforms or data centers, partly because it's probably cheaper and because it improves the latency to the others. That on the other hand means that we're taking away maybe some of the transit revenue from Tom and from the large international carriers, as this is becoming more localized, still being monetized, but being monetized by others. And I think also what we are seeing, I'm going to say the last thing, and maybe Stephen can comment on this, but we're also seeing a lot more the enterprises and completely different type of networks entering the interconnection ecosystem. And part of that is, now we talk a lot about the consumer focus here so far, but it's also what we're seeing is, of course, the growth in all the other services, SaaS services, enterprise type models, where all these enterprises wants to have direct interconnection with those platform providers. And that's the other thing we're seeing moving, is again, is taking the carrier to some extent out of the equation, but it's still, value and monetized by them. So I think the ecosystem is evolving in that point.
Speaking on this, question for Tom. Dom already mentioned the greening of streaming as one of the things that's happening. Power consumption is rising, but we also get a lot more, I wouldn't say resentment, but people wanting to have issues with the fact that we use so much power in general as an industry. If you look at Netherlands, where I live, 4 Google data centers were basically scrapped by Google, because of the fact that there was an audience saying, hey, we just don't want all our power being used, all the data centers, etc. So do we see this as a potential risk as well, not only truly from a capacity environment, but also the pressure from the public in terms of needing to be more greener, let's put it that way, as an industry?
I think it's actually more an opportunity than a risk. I think we've seen over the last decade or so the slow move away from building out into, in Europe, the FLAP market, so Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris. There was a tendency just to pile infrastructure into those because connectivity was cheap, everyone was there, and people would just backhaul from their local or their location into those markets. I think those mega metros aren't sustainable from a resiliency point of view. There was the issue in Frankfurt a couple of months ago with the World War II bomb that was found, that they had to evacuate a radius which covered quite a lot of the data center population in Frankfurt. I think it's an opportunity to sort of push out to wider locations, to smaller locations that maybe weren't as financially viable before, but when you take into account that the extra restrictions and the public sentiment, maybe they are more useful. That obviously helps with the localization and the latency as well. I think it also potentially drives some efficiencies. Every generation of routing equipment, every generation of CDN servers, generally, gigabits per watt goes down, or you get more efficiency out of those servers. So it will also drive those companies to potentially accelerate some of their refresh cycles to get some of the less efficient kit out of the network. I think there's also room for slightly more left field or less utilized locations. For example, in the US, for our edge compute deployment, we're reusing space in our central offices, which used to be full of bit legacy TDM switches that filled half a room. Those have all disappeared now, but that space and power we can take advantage of with reuse it for modern technologies.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Stephan, one for you. Akamai recently announced that they hit the 200 terabit milestone in just 2 years from the 100 terabit milestone. Yet, if I looked at the Akamai numbers, if you look at the growth of the media segment and what they're doing in terms of revenue, that basically stays pretty flat. So the growth is more on the security side. If you look at it in terms of delivery, also from a telco perspective as such, is this still sustainable on the longer term to keep it like that? Because it seems there is basically a lot of growth and it keeps growing. Yet, from a business point of view, there seems to be less relevance. How do you look at that?
Well, when I was running transit business at DT, that sounded very familiar. So we actually had to, we had to pour capex into that problem, and the revenues themselves were not really sustainable for that business. For me, it looks like these are similar patterns, that there are players out there who just have these, say, bit pusher products as a byproduct, which mainly fill the pipes and support the footprint, like the regional or geographic reach. But then it seems like if you don't really have a, say, a proper or a full focus, low cost network running, you probably need to add additional services which run on that infrastructure, which then actually return the money to you. For me, it sounds like they will never actually have a standalone profitability.
Just for bit delivery, so exactly.
Yeah.
Tom, I'm sure you cannot tell too much about it, but can you give a take at least on that subject from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, it's not a secret in this industry that there's it's very rare that IP prices or CDN prices go up, or as a per unit cost. There's always downward pressure on those. That always drives people to look at new architectures, new ways of deployment. But it's not it's not something that's going to go away. One of the things I've been looking at recently is sort of taking some of our traffic data and looking by country, by population, as to what the average use per user is. And there are vast disparities across countries, or even within Europe, or sort of some of the other more developed places. So there's two ways that traffic's going to keep growing. It's either going to keep growing because there's more of the same, or it's going to more people. And I think both of those are going to be true. So there's always going to be a driver to get more efficient, and as an industry, that's something we need to try and keep working to.
Yeah. Kurtis?
I don't think I have much to add to that. I mean, I think Stephan and Tom has covered that a bit.
Okay, good, great. This is an interesting one. Low latency. So latency in general, right? So we're all looking at low latency, etc., etc. How can the ecosystem of exchanges, ISPs, carriers, etc., help in this low latency move that we're all doing? Because we all got a role in this place anyway. So how do we help as an industry there? I know some initiatives are there for interconnection on low latency, etc., etc. How do you look at this? Is this really separated from each other? And is this really on the business side or very specific applications? Or where do you see this, Kurtis?
I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of promise at the moment from 5G with lower latency on the radio side to edge computing to all of this, is sort of all this evolution, if you want, to cut down latency and to improve latency. And first of all, I think that, as I said, I think that there is a little bit of an equation of will we see a interconnection point in every cell tower? No, we won't. Not anytime soon, or if ever. I don't think we'll see even interconnection in every city. I mean literally every city. I think it's also far away. I think we'll see a few metro areas per country. In the UK, we already have a few, and there's a few other European countries that have quite dense interconnect markets. And I think we will see more of these deployments, but I don't think that means we're going to see there's not going to be a Facebook data center in every city in the UK, right? But it will be a further hierarchy of the content deployment, and where we will have, where edge in this case will be that some of the more latency sensitive time critical compute might be posed much more closer to the end user. I think what's interesting is that if you listen to some of the architectures from well, let's take 5G as an example, or for that matter, some of the new satellite delivery, they all look at this from the network operator, but no one has actually thought about what this looks like from the content side, right? There's always, you'll see this 5G diagram that connected to a cloud that says content or the internet. But no one has realized that if you are that cloud, then you have every single virtual operator in the country is coming towards you, and that doesn't really quite scale from their point of view either, right? So I think that's still to be decided how that looks like. I think there'll be more interconnect driven in a more finer grade method. And as I said, it's going to be a much more hierarchical delivery of content and application. But I think the other thing that comes from the edge part that we rarely talk about is that it's actually a new form of delivering an application, right? And that's going to require a rethink of how those applications are built. And if you're a Facebook or Google, you probably have thought this through. But if you're the app developer or the streaming game developer on this, you probably might not have done that, right? That's still a journey they're on, right? So I think there's a lot of things that needs to come together to deliver this lower latency promise that we have. But it will definitely happen. It's going to happen, but it's not going to be this overnight shift. There's going to be a gradual transition to that model, I think.
Good. Stephan, I know you have a special take on this in terms of low latency with CDNs, ISPs, etc. Could you give a little view on this?
Yeah, sure. I think, like Kurtis already said, when people talk about all these dreams about low latency, I have the impression that a lot of stuff is not thought through yet. And also a lot of infrastructure is just simply not existing. And I also have my doubt if there is any killer application rich enough money-wise to support that the infrastructure which potentially would be needed in, say, the remote dreams of a couple of people. But actually, if we just get to reality, back to realities, I think one of the challenges we see beyond, say, deeper deployments, which could be hosted edge compute, installations of whatever providers in telco core offices. So I think there will probably be new business models also emerging, which then also would address that power situation a bit, or shift that power problem from the data center or the content or application provider to the telco. But on the other side, also what we see with our flow director, there's a lot of, well, even today when people just need to address which server cluster should serve which subscriber, you wouldn't believe how much wild guessing there is. So we carry a lot of traffic, say from Hamburg down to Munich, just because it was mismapped traffic. So just installing that infrastructure doesn't really solve the problem to allocate the resources correctly and to also have a full path control. And that is only the path within one network. If I just think of in a, say, very well-connected domestic network there. But if you think of further remote networks, there's more complicated paths where you have like transit operators in between. There's just funny routing happening. And you might actually have neighboring infrastructure and the traffic is still just doing the scenic route and just going somewhere and back. Or you have these asymmetrical path situations where the delivery is actually pretty well, but the return path has just a funny, probably commercially driven routing installed. So I think there doesn't seem to be a full holistic view on it. And I only focus on a very slim element of how do you actually map and route traffic. And even there, it's we are way behind what some dreams might suggest.
Okay, so you basically say here there needs to be more handshake capabilities as such between the different upstream downstreams as such, just to make sure that the latency is better. There's a lot of work to can still be doing there, including all the data that we have around us.
And I think BGP is a great protocol. It's a couple of decades old, and there hasn't been too much development yet well, the internet has been built as a best effort protocol or best effort product per definition. So there's little service control. And well, if you build all that infrastructure, you should actually be able to, at one point, control what's happening. Or at least the parties involved should be able to control it. And currently, I think there's just very little focus on that element.
Good. What's your take on this, on low latency from a Lumen perspective? I mean, covering ISP, CDN, transit.
Yes. So I guess we've got sort of three hats to address this via. So exactly. let's start with transit. So one of the things we're trying to do is drive needless latency out of the IP network. Historically, peering and customer interconnect has been done in a more limited number of locations. Say in the US, there was traditionally about 9 locations. In Europe, probably about 6, 7 that you could pretty much guarantee that large networks would interconnect in. We're trying to push that a lot deeper so that we can try and hand over that traffic, because it both improves performance and it improves the costs. Because if I'm carrying the traffic somewhere and then you're carrying the traffic back, we're both paying for traffic to leave the country and come back when we don't need to. So that's one of the sort of there's performance benefits, there's underlying cost benefits coming back to the previous, how do you deal with continually falling unit costs. On the CDN side, it's about how can we push the servers more out into the edge of our network, but also, to Stephan's point, you need to make sure that localization's right. There's no point having servers in Munich if you're going to serve them from Amsterdam. You need to make sure that targeting is working, and that works. How does that work in a CDN? But how does that work when, say, an edge compute scenario where the end user's having to do that targeting, or the transit scenario where the end users or the content providers having to do that? And then I guess finally on the ISP side, we're trying to encourage the content providers to come into our aggregation gateways, which is where we aggregate the local DSL gateways for all of the region. I think there's about 45, 50 of those across the US. Obviously, we're not expecting everyone to build out to all of them day one, but to try and make sure that, again, that brings the content as close to the end user customer as possible, but it also reduces our costs because we don't need to transport that then across our backbone. So I think the low latency is all about driving up performance for the end user and driving down the costs for the underlying networks.
And I think what I've seen for myself, a lot of people talk about the low latency HLS or whatever, but there's an underlying infrastructure that still also has a lot of things that still can be happening there that we're basically still not targeting, and there's still a lot of improvement there. Last short question, 2 minutes, Kurtis. Very short. CDNs, by definition, in the early stages, really were having a decentralized approach just to save on costs for transmission, basically, the carrier. That's basically how CDN started. Then we all moved into super pops as an architecture. Now it seems we're going back to edge in the end. As a London exchange, do you think this is hurting your business model, that it's moving back to edge in the end? Or do you think this is actually a capability for you guys to be in between?
I think, as I said, I think it's actually going to be more. I think it's going to be both. As it's going to be edge and central, and it's going to be something in between. And that's what I said. We're seeing for the regional exchanges, we're seeing a lot more interest to build out to the second-tier cities, if you want, and use that to deliver part of the content, but also to feed the edge. So I think it's a great opportunity for us, and we're seeing a lot more uptake on that as well.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Giving it back to Dom. We're spot on in terms of time, I guess. So I'll give it back to Tom. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely awesome panel. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kurtis. Thank you, Stephan. Thank you, Thomas. Absolutely brilliant. I feel like I've been out for a run. The pace we're moving at today is somewhat exhausting. Maybe I shouldn't have had 3 coffees before I started, but really appreciate it. And thanks again, Kurtis, for your sponsorship.